Good morning, kia ora friends. In this video, I'm going to help you to understand a little bit about the origins of trauma, which are a stress pattern that you have and what this does to your mind. And I'm also going to give you a little hack. You'll have to wait till the end of this short video just to help you to overcome when you are challenged by a trauma pattern. So we're going to go deep and we're going to go into your ancestral pathways, which is why I've got this photo behind me, and I'll put a link at the end with this little enterprise where I sell these ancestral talismans. The starting place to discuss trauma is that it doesn't start with you. So trauma is a pattern that is carried down family lines, and it came from your ancestors, and it doesn't start with you. But what happens over your life is that you create a mind and a body pattern that bring this trauma forward. And what is really important is what was going on for your parents before you were born, and around the time of your conception, but definitely for those first 7 years of your life, which is when your mind patterns are formed because of decisions that you made based around the relationships of your family and the experience of your early life. So it's going back to these threads and not just looking at what was going on for your parents, but especially looking at what's unresolved in your own mother's trauma pattern. So how she was with her mother and what issues were with her parents or with others, or what issues she had that she was holding on to, because it is when conception or pregnancy or children come into your life that this is really a trigger that sets off this intergenerational and ancestral trauma pattern. So basically, if you want to understand more about trauma, go back to the time of your conception. Go back to the time when you were in your mother's womb, and look. And if you don't know, you'll have to try and intuit it. You really want to look at what your mother was going through when she was conceiving you, and in particular, what her relationship was like with her mother, and what her mother had gone through. Because here's the crazy thing. So trauma in your mum's line, which came from her mother's line and her mother's line before that, actually sits there as a little program waiting to be unleashed. So a trauma pattern gets released gradually through your life, but particularly when you enter into significant intimate relationships, and even more so when you start to have children or when you are under pressure. So this is where when we're put under pressure and when our mind is overloaded, this is where our unconscious patterns from childhood start to resurface, because there is unresolved trauma, and it just sits there and sits there and sits there until you deal with it, which is normally because you're being triggered into a reaction. So trauma doesn't start with you, but it can end with you. Because if you resolve a trauma pattern in your life, you'll essentially break the chain of your mother and her mother before that, and what was programmed in when you were being conceived as a wee baby. So let me give you an example, because I know that's quite theoretical. But so, for example, in my own experience, my pattern was conflict in relationships, and I grew up in a lot of family violence. There was a lot of fighting, and my mother was a teenager when she had me, and my dad was a street kid, and he ran away, and they got together. And he had in his line, his mother, same thing. There was a lot of conflict and a lot of violence. And then behind both of my parents, there's just like generations of warfare. So surprise, surprise, I had a conflict and relationship trauma pattern which sat inside me, because your mind is formed 0 to 7 years. So that trauma pattern sat inside me until it surfaced, and it surfaced as anger, and it surfaced as fighting, and it surfaced as issues with in my own family. And the trigger point was my having my own children. So about the time that I first, I got pregnant with my first child was the time when all of this started to unpack. And that's because, not surprising, my parents were teenagers, but my mother had not resolved the issues that came through her line herself. And my father, same, his mother had not resolved this cultural disconnection and this pattern of anger in her line. So it was in me, and it was waiting and waiting and seeding, and I didn't even know, because it's in, and for me it was in my subconscious mind, and that will be the same for you. So it doesn't have to be conflict in relationships. I just gave you that example because that is close to home for me, so I can explain it. But you will have a trauma pattern. Because if you have any anxiety, if you feel gripped by any of these negative patterns of fear, uncertainty, lack, or doubt, so which is pretty much everyone on the planet, you'll have your own trauma pattern. And I'm not saying this to make you feel like it's a bad thing, but I'm actually saying it because if you can recognize this trauma pattern and recognize that it starts with you, and take responsibility for those thoughts, those decisions that you made when you were 0 to 7, if you can actually find the pattern, you can break it. And let me tell you, as a practitioner who works with thousands of people with their intergenerational trauma patterns, it's really easy to break it as soon as you find it. And the other reason why you want to break it is because if you intend to enter into a significant intimate relationship, which most people desire, or at least one or several in their lives, and particularly if you have young children, or you want to have children, or you want to understand why there's so much pressure on you with having a family, then it is really, really important that you challenge this pattern. But also because there's a gift in challenging it, which means that you don't pass it on to your children, and they won't pass it on to their children. It doesn't matter what problem you think you have, that is just a creation of your thoughts. And those thoughts are based on those patterns, those inherited ancestral patterns, but they are not you. And you do not have to carry them on. So there's a really good reason to actually see your trauma, to see your pattern, and to take responsibility and deal with it. So how do you find it? Well, look at what is happening in your life. Look at what you are mirroring through relationships with yourself, with other people, with alcohol, with coffee, with work, with your health or lack of health, with your body. It's not hard to find the trauma pattern. And rather than blame the stimuli, which I tell you I did for many, many years, I blamed other people. Rather than look at the stimuli, look at yourself and find this pattern, and go back to what you know of your parents, and look at the unresolved patterns that they were experiencing. So there is a massive body of science around this, which is called epigenetics, and it's the storing of these patterns in your DNA. I just want to show you something because this is really interesting. I want to show you this book and just talk to you a little about these stress facts. So the human default is 80% negative. And I talked about epigenetics, but in this book, it didn't start with you. Get it? Mark Wallen. It's not a very clear image. This book will help you to understand some of the science that sits behind trauma patterns That's a little bit about how you, what trauma pattern is and how you find it. So this is a little bit about how you deal with it. And I'm not going to go into great depth here because it is on a public forum, but you can reach out to me if you're interested. And I run programs to help you deal with trauma, and also have written a book about how you harness your own mind and challenge trauma thinking. Key tool to be able to deal with your trauma is firstly to recognize it, secondly to take 100% responsibility for dealing with every single thought as it comes up, and the third is to feel your way to feeling different by using your slow brain waves. Now, your slow brain waves are not the brain waves that I'm speaking to you now. It is not speaking fast or watching or doing anything that is active and wakeful. It is slow. It is hacking into your theta and your delta brain waves. So I'm going to leave you with that because you can find your theta and your delta brainwaves. It's really easy. And one of the best ways is to slow down and meditate for a few minutes in the morning. It's not very long, but you will find this. And the only person who can really do this work is you. So you just want to learn about how you get into those brainwaves, theta and delta. And if you want some help doing that, you can reach out to us. Links are below for both. Thank you for listening.